A bishop preached in lines so short and so direct that his entire city started calling him Golden Word, and that nickname has survived 16 centuries to reach us today. This is Saint Peter Chrysologus, celebrated by the Church on July 30th, born around the year 380 in Forum Cornelii, today's Imola, in Italy. Peter was trained and ordained deacon by Bishop Cornelius of Imola, and around the year 430 he was raised to the See of Ravenna, at a time when that city actually housed the imperial court of the Western Roman Empire. In an environment full of power, political instability, and intense debates over the very identity of Christ, Peter chose a different path, teaching through homilies that were short, concrete, and accessible to absolutely anyone, not long and complicated sermons. An ancient collection preserved about 176 sermons attributed to him, covering the Creed, the Incarnation, Penance, the Eucharist, and the Virgin Mary. In one of those homilies, Sermon 43, he left us a line that sums up his entire call to charity: "O man, be your own standard of mercy." In 1729, Pope Benedict XIII officially declared him a doctor of the Church. Peter Chrysologus is remembered as the doctor of homilies, and his life teaches something simple: you don't need to complicate the faith to truly feed the hearts of the people listening. Sometimes the right, simple word is worth more than 1,000 speeches. On that same day, centuries later, the Church also celebrates a friar who dreamed of preaching across the whole world, and ended up spending his entire life sitting inside a small confessional. This is Saint Leopold Mandić of Castelnuovo, born on May 12, 1866, in Herceg Novi, and who died in Padua on that same July 30, 1942. Croatian, raised in a region shaped by cultural and religious borders, Leopold deeply longed to work for reconciliation between Eastern and Western Christians. But his fragile health, short stature, and a speech difficulty prevented the missionary preaching he had imagined for himself, and his superiors sent him instead to the confessional. And what looked like a limitation became his entire life's vocation. Starting in 1909, with almost no interruption, he welcomed people from every walk of life in Padua, many hours every single day, offering patient listening and sacramental mercy, without ever lowering the real demand of conversion. During the First World War, because he refused to renounce the nationality tied to his homeland, he was forced into internal exile in southern Italy. Already elderly, he faced esophageal cancer and kept serving until his strength finally gave out. He was canonized by St. John Paul II in 1983. Leopold is remembered as the patron of confessors, and his life teaches that God can turn even our greatest limitation into the doorway to our truest mission. On the other side of the ocean, in a poor hospital in Mexico, a vocation was being born that would change the lives of thousands of the sick. The Church also celebrates today Saint Maria de Jesus Sacramentado Venegas de la Torre, born Maria Natividad, on September 8, 1868, in the town of Zapotlanejo, Jalisco, and who died in Guadalajara on that same July 30, 1959. Maria lost her mother while still a young girl and became fully orphaned by 19. After a spiritual retreat in 1905, she joined a small group of women caring for the sick at the newly created Hospital of the Sacred Heart, and it was there that her vocation took daily shape. She worked as a nurse, managed scarce resources, and treated the poor, the elderly, and the sick with a gentleness that marked everyone she met. Elected Superior General in 1921, she founded the Daughters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and wrote the Institute's constitutions. The work survived the Mexican Revolution and years of intense conflict between church and state, but Maria never abandoned hospital service. She was canonized in 2000, after the recognition of an inexplicable medical recovery, a man whose heart started beating again after a long cardiac arrest, with no brain damage at all. She's remembered today as the first Mexican woman ever canonized, and as a model for nurses and caregivers everywhere. And the lesson she leaves is clear: caring for someone else's body, with patience and tenderness, is also a profound way of loving God. In a strikingly similar way, another Mexican woman lived out that same calling to serve the sick poor, except hers began inside her own illness. This is Blessed Maria Vicenta of Santa Dorotea Chavez Orozco, born on February 6, 1867, in Cotija, Michoacán, and who died in Guadalajara on that same July 30, 1949. In 1892, a severe case of pleurisy brought her to a small parish hospital kept alive through charity, and being cared for there is exactly where she discovered her own mission. Once recovered, she came back shortly after, but now to serve the poorest of the sick permanently. In 1895, she and 2 companions took private vows, and from that small corps the Congregation of the Servants of the Most Holy Trinity and of the Poor was born, dedicated to hospitals, clinics, and shelters. Vicenta led that work for about 30 years. During the Mexican religious persecutions of 1914 and 1926, when one hospital was even occupied by soldiers, she stayed behind with a single novice to treat the wounded, enduring real threats without ever abandoning a single patient. Under her leadership, 17 foundations were established. Starting in 1942, illness and progressive blindness accompanied her until the end. She died during the elevation of the host, at a mass celebrated right in the room where she lay ill. She was beatified in 1997. Vicenta is a model for nurses, caregivers, and servants of the poor, and her life proves that those who have truly suffered are often the ones who best know how to care for the suffering of others. Over in the United States, a man who could barely pass his seminary classes would become one of the most beloved religious figures the country has ever known. The Church also celebrates today Blessed Francis Solano Casey, better known as Solanus Casey, born on November 25, 1870, in Oak Grove, Wisconsin, the son of Irish immigrants, and who died in Detroit on July 31, 1957. Before religious life, he worked as a lumberjack, a prison guard, and a streetcar operator. It was witnessing an act of violence that pushed him to seriously discern the priesthood. He tried the diocesan seminary, but classes taught in German and Latin exposed real academic struggles. Welcomed by the Capuchins, he was ordained in 1904, but only as a sacerdo simplex. He could celebrate Mass, but had no faculties to hear confessions or preach doctrinal sermons. Instead of resenting that limitation, Solanus turned humble tasks into an extraordinary apostolate. As doorkeeper in Yonkers, Manhattan, Detroit, and Huntington, he welcomed the poor, the unemployed, and the sick, listened to their anguish, arranged for food, and recorded their prayer requests. Many witnessed healings or help after his blessings, but he credited everything to God, always encouraging gratitude even before knowing the outcome of a request. He also helped start a soup kitchen for the needy in Detroit during the Great Depression. He was beatified in 2017. Solanus is remembered as the patron of doorkeepers and of people who struggle academically, and his life teaches that God can do extraordinary things even through someone the world considers merely ordinary. On the other side of the world, in China, a simple shopkeeper would refuse to deny his faith even facing certain death. The Church celebrates today Saint Joseph Yuan Guanyin, a lay martyr born around 1853 in Hui Village, Hebei Province, and killed in Dang at the end of July 1900, at 47 years old. We know very little about his family life. The records preserved far more about his death than about his childhood or conversion. What we do know is that he worked as a shopkeeper in the local market and belonged to the Catholic community there. In 1900, the movement known in the West as the Boxer Rebellion spread intense violence across northern China against Christians, unjustly linked to foreign presence, even though people like Joseph were simply members of their own Chinese community. The Roman martyrology records that he was killed by followers of that movement precisely because of his Christian name, refusing to abandon his faith even under direct threat of death. He was canonized by St. John Paul II in 2000, together with St. Augustine Zhaorong and 119 other martyr companions. The holiness recognized in Joseph is exactly that, pure and simple martyrdom, requiring no miracle for beatification. And the lesson he leaves is absolute: faithfulness to the faith has nothing to do with who you are or how much you have. A simple shopkeeper can become a saint through a single final choice. Going back many centuries, now to medieval Flanders, a young noblewoman would endure a marriage so cruel that the Church recognized her as a martyr. This is Saint Godelieve of Gistel, born around 1050 near Boulogne-sur-Mer, and murdered in Gistel probably in 1070. The daughter of nobles, Godelieve was given in marriage to Bertolf of Gistel, but her husband rejected her, and her mother-in-law turned the household hostile. According to the earliest account of her life, written about 10 years after her death, she endured hunger and mistreatment, yet kept sharing food with the poor even while having so little for herself. After seeking protection from her family and the church, she returned to the marital home under a promise of reconciliation, a promise that turned out to be a trap. Two of Bertolf's servants ended up strangling her and throwing her body into a pond. On July 30, 1084, Bishop Radbod II solemnly elevated her relics in Gistel, formally recognizing the devotion already alive among the people. Godelieve became the protector of Gistel and is still invoked today by people enduring abusive marriages or serious family difficulties. Her life, marked by so much suffering, teaches something that still resonates today: no cruelty endured in silence goes unnoticed by God, and kindness held on to in the middle of pain is never wasted. Even further back, in the earliest centuries of Christianity, a widow would lose everything she owned simply for refusing to hide her faith. The Church also celebrates today Saint Julita of Caesarea in Cappadocia, who lived in what is now Turkey and died burned during the persecution of Emperor Diocletian, sometime around the years 303 to 306. Julita owned property that an influential man tried to seize by force. When she took the matter to court, she seemed about to win a favorable ruling, until her own opponent argued that, as a Christian, she was excluded from the legal protection guaranteed by the imperial edicts of the time. The judge then made the entire case depend on a single gesture, offering incense to the Roman gods. Julita chose to lose her property, her legal rights, and her own life rather than deny her creator. According to Saint Basil the Great, who preached about her roughly 70 years later, Julita walked voluntarily into the fire, arguing that women and men, equally created in the image of God, share the very same capacity for courage in the face of suffering. Her holiness rests exactly in that inner freedom before a system that had turned faith itself into grounds for losing every civil right. And the lesson Julita leaves is still relevant: there is a freedom that no human injustice can ever truly take from someone who refuses to deny what they believe. Over in medieval Spain, a quiet man would help spread across all of Europe the very work his own brother had begun. This is Blessed Mans of Guzman, born around 1170 in Calaruga, Castile, and who died in 1235 at the monastery of San Pedro de Gumiel de Isan. Mans was the brother of Saint Dominic Delaware Guzman, founder of the Order of Preachers, and one of the very first companions to join that still young group. On August 15, 1217, when Dominic decided to scatter the brothers gathered in Toulouse so the order could grow and spread, Mans set out with 3 other friars toward Paris. That small group took part in founding the convent of Saint-Jacques, a decisive milestone for the Dominican presence alongside the University of Paris. In 1219, Dominic sent him back to Spain, entrusting him with the spiritual care of the nuns at a convent in Madrid. After his own brother's canonization in 1234, Mans returned to Calaruga and helped build a church at the site associated with Dominic's birth. He died the following year, and his cult was officially confirmed in 1834. Mans never sought the spotlight. His importance lies precisely in the quiet service he gave to the order's earliest expansion, accompanying communities in silence. And the lesson he leaves is simple: not every calling needs to be the most visible one to be just as essential. And we close today's July 30th journey with 2 martyrs so inseparable that the Church has never celebrated one without the other in 16 centuries of history, Saints Abdon and Senin of Rome. We don't know with certainty the birthplace or birth date of either man, nor details of their individual actions, but the historical core of their veneration is extraordinarily ancient. An old Roman calendar from the year 354 already recorded their names on July 30th, at the cemetery of Pontian, along the Via Portuense. That shows the Christian community of Rome was already celebrating their martyrdom anniversary and visiting their tomb just a few generations after the great persecutions. Tradition links them to the persecution of Emperor Decius, around the year 250, presenting them as foreigners brought to Rome as prisoners because of their faith. Later accounts, written centuries afterward, describe them facing wild beasts that refused to attack them before their final martyrdom, scenes that inspired a great deal of religious art, but should be read as devotion, not as exact historical documentation. In the Middle Ages, devotion to Abdon and Senin spread across Italy, France, and especially Catalonia, where they became traditional protectors of farmers and harvests. And with that story, We close today's 10 saints. If any of these lives touched your heart, subscribe here to Saint of the Day, comment asking one of these saints to intercede for someone you love, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear this message today. Every share like that is truly a small act of evangelization. And remember, the full prayer to each of these saints is right here in the video description.